Hello and welcome to NIAGA Spotlight with me, Tehmina Kaoosji. NIAGA Spotlight takes us through the week in economic analysis and future affairs. Now today on Analysis, our spotlight falls on Malaysia's EV moment after the tax holiday. So now as we enter January 2026, Malaysia's electric vehicle journey hits a decisive inflection point. The tax holiday for fully imported EVs has ended, closing a chapter that shaped prices, purchasing behavior, all the way since 2022. Now in the final stretch of last year, buyers rushed to beat the deadline. More than 31,000 EVs or so were registered between Jan to October 2025, already exceeding the full year total for 2024, with October alone recording a 177% year-on-year surge. Now, this spike was real, but also policy-driven, because despite the growth, pure battery EVs still account for roughly around only 5% of total vehicle registrations and just around 3.4% of new car sales in the first half of 2025. Now, this matters when Malaysia's targets are far more ambitious overall. Roughly 20% EV penetration by 2030, 80% by 2050. The question now is not aspiration, but alignment. Affordability, infrastructure, and consumer confidence moving at the same pace as our EV policy targets. At the same time, the industry itself is also shifting. Perodou's launch of its first homegrown EV paired with a battery as a service model reflects a push to localize, control costs, rethink ownership for Malaysian consumers. Proton's EV assembly plants with substantial annual capacity signal that electrification is also becoming an industrial strategy beyond just a consumer trend. Now, these moves point to deeper stakes, jobs, supply chains, long-term competitiveness. So that's why the first week of January is pretty critical for such a discussion. Incentives have ended, prices are adjusting, buyers and manufacturers are recalibrating. So what happens next will determine whether Malaysia's EV transition becomes a durable economic shift or perhaps stalls under the weight of premature policy withdrawal. Welcoming to the studios for this most interesting discussion, Aiman Abdullah, Managing Editor with MalaysianMotoring.com, and Hsiang, Vice President of Chery Auto Malaysia. A very good morning, gentlemen. Thank you so much for making time, bright and early on the new year. How are you both?
We're good. Thank you very much for having us.
Yeah. Fantastic. So, Aiman, perhaps we could launch into speaking a little bit about the market recalibration after incentive expiry. Of course, it's really early days, only the 2nd of January. But tell us a little bit about what you've been hearing from the ground, from conversations with dealers, buyers, etc. Situate us a little.
I think for buyers and consumers at the moment, they're all quite happy with the fact that they've had access to these cars for quite some time. Mercifully, for a lot of brands, there haven't been supply issues through 2025, and so anyone who placed a booking had access to their vehicles, and they got delivery of them last year. Yeah. But as for dealers and distributors, the market in general, there is a little bit of confusion with regards to how the updated tax structures are going to affect their cars and are going to affect their pricing, because obviously we haven't seen the full extent of this yet. As of today, there haven't yet been updated price lists being released by distributors and various brands in order to explain the various price hikes on those models. Some brands are going as far as to have imported a bunch of stock last year in order to sort of bridge the gap.
Right, that little buffer for themselves.
Between now and whenever it is that their own CKD operations might begin. And so hopefully for consumers, there shouldn't be too much of a shock, but we might be able to see a little bit more of how the ripple effects of this updated tax structure will affect the market a little bit later, perhaps maybe next week.
Of course, next week indeed, right? So from dealers and distributors and conversations you'll be having, I'll jump over to Hsiang in just a second. Is pricing more of a dominant concern?
Pricing will always be the primary driver for adoption in Malaysia. That is something that extends not just to electric vehicles, but also to plug-in hybrids, as well as mild hybrids, and even just traditional internal combustion vehicles. Malaysia is a very price-sensitive market. And as a result, whenever there is an affordable vehicle or an incentive being provided to make vehicles more affordable, that usually results in a simulated surge toward that vehicle or toward those products. So yeah, I do think that price still plays an important factor, and I think that a lot of car makers with their BEVs have been able to provide a huge amount of value for the market by being able to leverage the economies of scale with their facilities abroad, while bringing those economies of scale and the affordability and the approachability from that into our market via that importation. But ultimately, whether or not that's good for our market and good for us as an automotive industry and automotive manufacturer and assembler, that might not necessarily be the case, which is why we're in the situation that we're in now.
Exactly. So thanks for that, because I think in broad strokes that really helps to situate us in today. Hsiang, so of course, tell us about, firstly, before we launch straight in, what was the most recent year, 2025, what was that like for Chery Auto in Malaysia?
So for Chery Auto Malaysia, the year 2025 has been a very significant year for us. The Chery Group actually started in Malaysia since July 2023. The first two products that we actually launched was the Omoda 5 and the Tiggo 8 Pro. Subsequently, with the adoption of electric vehicles, we launched the Omoda E5 in March 2024. And after that, moving into a CKD operation for the E5 in November 2024. We had the first, where the first Chery electric vehicle was assembled in Malaysia. So ultimately, it has supported us in both the traditional ICE powertrain and also the electric vehicle. So sales were very good. In the year 2025, we overachieved our numbers. We also did better than the year 2024 as well. Yeah.
Exactly. So now that, of course, brings me to, of course, asking you, so what sort of capabilities or insights did that experience of actually local assembly for the Omoda E5 actually help Chery to gain?
I think back to what Aiman have mentioned, in Malaysia, pricing will always be the primary effect. So when we do assembly operation, right, it helps to bring down the prices. And also, it gives confidence to the Malaysia consumer as well. Because ultimately, if you are doing a CBU business, then, of course, customer might be thinking, would you be here to stay? Do you have a spare part operation? So what's the long-term plan for the brand? So when we start the brand, we ensure that assembly operation is already in place. So when we launch product, ultimately, it will all be CKD. Also, it also brings in more investment to the country as well. So that will always be the goal for Chery Auto Malaysia.
So clearly, it is actually shaping how you are going to be approaching electrification for the rest of the tenure, right?
Correct.
Super interesting. And perhaps were there more localization-based decisions because you've had the all-local assembly as well?
Yes. So ultimately, before we launch a product, we always gather the customer insights, what do they want from the brand itself. So Omoda E5 is something that was an interest from our Omoda 5 customers, where it's ICE based. Then when we launch it, we also see that there are different type of customer who wants the best of both worlds, where they do not have the range anxiety and they are still able to travel, for example, more than 1,200 kilometers, which our PHEV is able to do. For an electric vehicle, the struggle will always be the range. The majority of the battery electric vehicle in Malaysia has an average range of about 400 over kilometers. And the charging time also takes a bit longer than filling up a petrol vehicle. It takes close to 30 minutes. So for that, I think the next wave in the industry would definitely be the plug-in hybrids, the hybrids, or even the range extended EVs, which is also in line with the government's aspiration.
Exactly. So it's all about actually ensuring that it's as smooth as possible on the customer side, right? Speaking of which, thanks for that, Hsiang. So Aiman, now even with this really rapid growth, so EVs, once again, they still remain a relatively small share of the total vehicle sales. So tell me more from your vantage point about some of your thoughts around expanding what the next phase of adoption needs to have in place so that we may or may not meet the ultimate targets that have been set, but how do we move closer towards them?
Well, I think that the biggest issue when it comes to EV adoption is the ability to charge. So the thing about EVs is that it's largely understood that these are great cars for urban commuting, when you're stuck in traffic, if you're just going back and forth, home to work, work to home, running around doing errands and stuff like that. Those are the best situations and best scenarios for an electric vehicle. But the trouble that we have now is that if you look at Kuala Lumpur, the Klang Valley, just as a particular area of focus, the majority of people who live within the Klang Valley all live in stratified homes. We live in condominiums and apartments and flats and so on. And in scenarios like that, it can be very challenging to charge. You might not be able to install a charger. You might not be able to have access to a charger. There might not be the necessary infrastructure to even provide public charging or shared charging between all the residents in a particular project.
Exactly, not enough chargers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So because of that, that has been, I suspect, the primary hindrance for adoption, because it's clearly not affordability anymore, because brands like TQ Wuling have already introduced vehicles that come in under 80,000 ringgit. Proton EMAS also has the EMAS 5, which comes in at under 70,000 ringgit, which means that we have managed to achieve price parity for these cars between electric vehicles and internal combustion vehicles. There is no more or no longer a premium to be paid for something with a battery versus something with internal combustion motor. So that's no longer the problem. But charging within town is already a struggle. And then when we move further out of the Klang Valley, then that struggle just amplifies further, because there are still plenty of what's referred to as charging deserts, or large gaps between public chargers and in certain parts of this country. Of course, our terrain and our geography is also a little bit challenging. Forget the East Coast, or the West Coast is generally quite populated. The East Coast is quite difficult to roll out chargers because the infrastructure is not there. And that's before we move on to our Bornean states of Sabah and Sarawak, where it gets even more challenging. And so that is certainly an issue that needs to be addressed before we can see true full movement and full confident movement towards electric mobility. Because once that problem is solved, and once people are assured enough and educated enough by not only the government but also by distributors and manufacturers that you can live with an EV day to day without any concern, once that happens, once the infrastructure and ecosystem is in place, then I suspect that we will see greater, more confident movement towards electric vehicles.
Exactly, because that consumer confidence for long-term ownership is perhaps what most of this is hinging around.
Yeah.
Welcome back to NIAGA Spotlight. Still with me, Tehmina Kaoosji, and today I'm looking at the electrical vehicle industry, particularly after Malaysia's tax holiday, with MalaysianMotoring.com and Chery Auto Malaysia live in the studios with us. Hsiang, so from Chery Auto's side, now following, of course, the E5 program, let's look at hybrids as an innovation pathway instead of a bit of a compromise in that sense, right? So Chery also introduced super hybrid technology across much of the locally assembled range.
Correct.
A couple of perspectives around that.
So when we first introduced the Omoda 5, it was very well taken. Then of course ultimately the customers were also wondering if we have electric vehicle as an additional variant to the product. So that's where we introduced it in March, and of course it complemented both the traditional IC, internal combustion engine, and with the addition of the battery electric vehicle. But of course, both these vehicles are definitely different. It serves different purpose. You have the traditional internal combustion, and you have the battery electric vehicle, which majority of our buyers are basically using it for a daily commute purpose, not for long traveling. You can. It's important to emphasize. But of course, let's say, for example, if you have a range of 430 kilometers, you want to go all the way to Penang, you need to plan your route properly. For example, from KL, halfway, you need to charge your vehicle back up to, for example, 80% and continue on towards. And after which, we've gathered even more customer insights, and they wish to see more from Chery Auto Malaysia. And majority of our customers, when they drive our vehicle, they like the response and the driving behavior of an electric vehicle, hence the launch of the Chery Super Hybrid, which if you were to drive a PHEV from our side, it basically drives like an electric vehicle, but without the anxiety, without the range anxiety of an electric vehicle. So I see it as complementing to different type of customer. If you need something where you only use it, for example, you're in Klang Valley, you're in Johor, you're in Penang, where you primarily just need a vehicle for daily commute, then the BEV may suit you. But if you travel very often, interstate traveling, then the PHEV might be a better choice for you. And of course, we still have the traditional internal combustion engine, which is the majority of the market share in Malaysia still. Yep.
Exactly. So it is sounding sort of like hybrids are lowering the barriers for adoption for customers who may not yet be ready for full electrification.
Correct. Correct.
perhaps a little bit of crystal ball gazing, do you think it's also going to see hybrids placed as in a transitional role ahead of more electrification literacy for consumers before they go ahead of wider EV adoption across the country?
I think that will definitely happen. I think with the excise duty the exemption is still going on for CKD vehicles. We will see definitely more brands coming in to set up the assembly plant to enjoy the benefits from it. So definitely the battery electric vehicle will still be here. And of course, that process of education will still be ongoing to the customers as well. But in the interim, there would also be other powertrain options like the plug-in hybrid that will fill the gap for customers who prefer to have that peace of mind. So definitely, I think it will be very how should I put it? It will be a very nice journey to see the transition from a traditional IC to the PHEV and then to the BEV, because like you mentioned at the beginning, the National Energy Transition Roadmap is also aiming at up to 20%, 30%, 40% by a certain time frame as well. So we do see that transition.
Exactly. And I'm also just wondering whether we may even have the data available to see and show us whether hybrids are helping, normalize electrified driving in those secondary cities that we were talking about, where, of course, your charging density is still pretty thin.
Well, at the moment, it doesn't. There is no data to suggest this transition. That data is not collected. It's not there. It's just that it's not collected. It's not collated.
Okay, that's super interesting. Actually.
Yeah, but that said, given the way modern plug-in hybrids operate, where they are primarily driven as an electric vehicle, primarily motivated by the electric motor, they provide the benefits of an EV without the range anxiety. And so from a personal perspective, based on my interactions with customers, my interactions with the general public with regards to how these systems work, especially right after test drives and so on, to understand kind of what the general consensus is around this. It provides them the ability to enjoy the benefits of an EV, that smooth running, no engine noise, no vibrations, no harshness, without the concern of having to look for a charger every 350 to 400 kilometers. And so I do believe that they play a significant role towards making that transition a little bit more comfortable. And then as you move into plug-in hybrids, that also normalizes the act of charging your car. That means looking for a charger, planning your routes, or installing a charger at home, or getting used to granny charging it on a 3-pin plug, for example. So I think that is something that they do play a significant role towards making that transition a little bit more comfortable. But at least now with modern plug-in hybrids, it does help to bridge that gap. You're no longer jumping headfirst into a brand new technology they're not familiar with. You still have the comfort of familiarity with plug-in hybrids, where you can still fuel up and recharge.
Exactly. There's a little bit of that acclimatization space over there, right? Yeah. So now let's talk, Aiman, policy maturity versus the market readiness. What are you seeing and what are you perhaps predicting as the incentives are winding down? Because of course some are also arguing that the market is being nudged towards maturity rather than being slowed down.
I think that the repeal of the tax holiday, or the ending of the tax holiday, is ultimately driven towards ensuring that our automotive industry, which is a significant contributor to our national gross domestic profit, it ensures that that industry remains on its toes and it remains evolving as the demand for cars and powertrains change over time. Malaysia is by far and away one of the most, if not the most mature automotive market within ASEAN. We've been assembling cars and building cars here longer than a lot of our ASEAN compatriots.
Absolutely.
And so as a result, we have a very mature vendor network. We also have a mature assembly network. And as a result, that's also why brands, for example, like Porsche and BMW and Mercedes-Benz assemble here. Volvo, for example, has been assembling here since 1962, if I recall, somewhere in the 60s. And they also assemble their BEVs here, the first to assemble fully electric vehicles in Malaysia. And so the reason why we need to remove this tax holiday is because ultimately, first, it's about driving the consumers. And so consumers have to be enticed to make that transition by making the cars affordable and appealing. But now comes the time to reward the brands that have actually made the necessary investments toward our market, not the ones who are just here to make a quick buck. because a lot of consumers were concerned that that was the case, as we saw a whole bunch of brands show up with a whole bunch of electric vehicles. We were concerned that it was just a fly-by-night operation. Now is the time where we will see the benefits roll in for the brands that have invested towards local assembly. Brands like Volvo, like TQ Wuling with Tan Chong, like Proton with their new facility in Tanjung Malim, and BYD with their facility coming up soon, as well as Chery's own campus that is coming up in Lembah Beringin, if I recall correctly.
Correct.
All prepared in order to provide not only our market with the products and the powertrain options that they want and the technology that they're looking for, but also to be able to feed the wider ASEAN market as well and position us as an export hub for high-value, complicated, complex vehicles, something that other emerging markets within the region might not necessarily have the talent pool and expertise to execute.
Exactly. I think, of course, you know, it's a case of trying really not to miss the forest for the trees, right?
Yes, precisely.
Because we're not only looking at accelerating localized adoption, but that ASEAN critical and also the wider Asia market. Very interesting indeed. So Hsiang, looking forward and looking ahead, what is exciting you most about Malaysia's, the EV as well as the hybrid landscape in the coming years? And also taking into context a little bit of what Aiman dovetailed with when we were speaking about the fact that there is huge opportunity really to situate Malaysia as that hub regionally.
I think being one of the automakers who have committed to an heavy investment, like what Aiman have mentioned, that definitely gives us the better fit. Because when we do the investment into Lembah Beringin, right, it not only just talk about domestic sales, it's also about export, it's also about technology transfer, it's also about R&D for the local market. So that's where I feel that for Chery, we definitely have a lot of new initiative coming in. And that would definitely help us in terms of paving the way for the next energy transition from the ICE to the PHEV to the BEV. I mean, that's a given. Other than that, from the market itself, we do see that in this year itself, there will be more automakers coming in with the new energy vehicle. So hence, we do see the shift as well. So until 2030, I think the powertrain would definitely have a very different mix from the current ratio. You might be able to see more than 10% or even more than 15%.
Right. From
the traditional ICE of 95%, 90%, now probably it will be below than that.
Yeah. And of course, should the government choose to continue to rationalize their fuel subsidies, then there will also be a very sensitive sort of middle-income market who'll be looking for vehicles that are a little bit more affordable to run, a little bit more affordable to fuel. You have to refuel less frequently, for example. And so, like as Hsiang said, I do think that we are not particularly ready as a country wholesale to move towards EVs. And so it is important that in the interim there are intelligent, cutting-edge technologies in order to help make that transition a little bit more comfortable.
And from a Chery Auto perspective, though, Hsiang, where would you like to see closer coordination? Policy clarity, or what kind of collaborations would help ease the path ahead for 2026?
I think, first of all, for the battery electric vehicle, right, what we did was that we collaborated with Chery to ensure the safety of our battery.
Yep.
Then the other areas where we collaborated was with MIROS, the Malaysia Institute for Road Safety Research, where we ensure that all products from Chery Auto Malaysia meets the highest standard when it comes to safety. So 5-star ASEAN NCAP is what our latest T7 PHEV and T8 PHEV has achieved. So that's something that as we grow as a brand, together with policymaker, we will ensure that whatever product that's being rolled out fits into the policymakers' requirement. Yeah.
Fantastic. Aiman as well as Hsiang, thank you so much for the insightful conversation.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
Now, as Malaysia's EV transition has moved past incentives and announcement, what matters now, of course, is the execution. The next phase will test whether the EV products are able to fit, of course, real consumer needs, and if localization is able to deliver scale as well as reliability, and of course, policy remaining steady enough to sustain confidence and lasting adoption. Well, that's all we have time for today. I'm Tehmina Kaoosji signing off for now. We'll see you again next week.